Hey everyone, and welcome to Comics from the Multiverse. This is a one-shot episode, and what that means is that I'm going to talk about one specific comic book. This won't be something that we do too much, but there is a couple of books where I might want to do a specific focused discussion. Obviously not a DC comic, because we have a comics podcast for that called Comics from the Multiverse, the main show. Go watch that, that's the thing. But there's a couple of key comics, and they're very notably linked, and the first one I'm going to be talking about today is Firefly issue 1, which is written by Greg Pak and art by Dan McDaid. This comes from Boom Comics. And the other comic that I'm thinking of doing a thing for this for is coming out in January, and it may have a certain Slayer of the Vampires in it. No surprises for guessing what that's going to be, but that's coming in January. But it stands to reason that if I want to do something for the new Buffy comic that's coming in January, then I'd also be interested in doing something for the Firefly comic, because I'm a big fan of both shows. And I also like Greg Pak as a writer. Greg Pak is a really good comic book writer. He is not someone that I've read a ton of, but whenever I have read any of his stuff, I've gotten really into it. He did a very small run on Action Comics a few years ago, which was one of the better things in the Superman comics of the time, during the New 52. He's done a bunch of Hulk stuff, which I've not even began to dig into, so that's something to do at some point. But so I like the writer. I love Firefly. Naturally, I'm very curious what this comic is. So we're going to dig into issue 1. I will start this spoiler free just to give you some thoughts on it. I do think it's very good. I think it's not perfect, but it's a little rough around the edges in some places. But it feels like a plot that would have been done on the show at some point. It feels like a natural fit for what these characters might have went through at some point. And the voice for the characters is typically pretty good. The characters sound like their counterparts. I can hear the voices of the actors as I'm reading it, which is really nice. There's only one or two lines of dialogue where I kind of felt like, oh, that's someone trying to do a Joss Whedon line, but it feels kind of off, or it feels like a little bit forced, or whatever. For the most part, it felt in tune. I think part of that is knowing what it sounds like when it's spoken. I think the Whedon style of dialogue can sound really rough when someone else does it, and or when you read it even and you don't know what it's supposed to sound like. I think there's proof of that. I think the proof of that is stuff like the X-Men movie that he did the script for, where some of the joke lines in that sound horrendous because he wasn't there to direct it, and it wasn't like someone who knew how they were supposed to sound. But if you're used to what his dialogue sounds like in movies and shows, you can kind of read it in the right rhythm. You can read it with the right amount of humor or snark or whatever. Not that he wrote this book, but Greg Pak is kind of emulating that style, and because I know what that style sounds like, I think the dialogue actually fits it for the most part, which is really nice. If I was going to critique it, I'd say that, I like the opening of this issue a lot. It's a really nice chance to get to see all the characters, at least once briefly in this sort of crisis. I will say it's a little bit too similar almost to a couple of things that already happened on the show and the movie. The way it kind of starts with, oh, there's something wrong with the ship, which is how the issue starts, feels very reminiscent to the start of Serenity, when Wash is, they're talking about, oh, the ship might explode, and Mal then goes around, and he does it's the one at the start of Serenity where he interacts with every character on the ship. It kind of has shades of that, where it starts off with Mal and Wash. The ship's, it's actually worse off than it was in the movie. Like, the engine's on fire. It was more chaotic, but it's very similar in concept, where they start off talking about the ship, and then one by one, other characters kind of either coming over the comms, or they're talking around the ship, and Mal's talking to them, and then we get a meeting with them all, and then the real plot of the issue kind of gets going. Although this is part of the real plot, this is part of the setup of why they're looking for replacement parts for their ship, because the ship is badly beat up after this. So that's the. So it's not bad. It's actually a really enjoyable thing. It occurred to me that arguably maybe that's the point, is that here's something very familiar. The opening is a very familiar type of scene that you would have gotten in Firefly or Serenity, and here's what's familiar, and then we'll start adding to it, as the issue goes on, and it kind of does that actually. I'm intrigued about where it's going, and the writing, like I say, is kind of on point. It flows very well. I think the art by Dan McDaid is generally pretty good and fits the style of the story, and fits the style of the characters. I think there's the occasional face that feels a little bit off, that feels a little bit almost too wide. It's that thing where one side of the face feels like it's maybe just a little bit like too far out and up a little bit or something like that. And it feels like a little oddly shaped. There's a couple of shots. There's one panel in particular of an Inara where it felt like that to me, but for the most part, it fits the style. It has that kind of sketchy Western vibe to it, just a little bit playful, a little bit cartoony to make it work, and I like that a lot. So I am going to start talking about the actual plot of the book now. So if you don't want spoilers for issue 1, go grab it. One issue of a comic ain't going to set you back too much. I mean, at least, compared to other things at least. And go and give it a read. And you can come back and get my thoughts on the rest. But if you don't mind spoilers or you've read the book, from here I'm going to talk about what's actually in the story. So the main premise of this is that the Unificators, which are like, how do I describe them? They're basically hunting down war criminals from the war. And the twist at the end of the issue is that they're hunting Mal and Zoe, because one of the jokes that's made early on, because this is set before the movie, it's worth mentioning that the characters who might have perished in the movie are in this book. It's set kind of probably, I imagine, just after the show, is where I'd maybe guess it is, and this ship shows up after they've dealt with the crisis of, okay, one of the engines is on fire because Mal bought a cheap part, which is Jane's fault because Jane betted and gambled all the money away. This big ship comes up, this Dreadnought 44, which Book recognises, and they're like, "Oh, wait, what's this?" And so this is one of the early ships of the war. And there's a neat little flashback moment actually, and it's not even a flashback. It's just one of the panels when Mal and Zoe look at each other. You get like the background goes red, and you see like just a single image of like them in the war, and it looks really horrific and scary. And it's like, okay, this is war stuff. And the afterword actually, Greg Pak's got an afterword in here. And he talks about how he wants this to be about dealing with the trauma of war in your past. So it's kind of a twist because they all think that the ship's after Simon and River because they're the fugitives, and that was typically something that happened a lot on the show, is that Simon and River were the ones that were being chased by the Alliance in some way. But this isn't just the straight up Alliance. This is a particular band, the Unificators, who come after war crimes, who obviously are on the winning side. In fact, when the ship first shows up, Mal says, "Oh, it's not a good idea that vets from the other side interact with me and Zoe because we were in the war, because we were in the Independence and the Browncoats." And that's something that's brought up. So the twist at the end, of course, is that the big ship, after they've sort of made a sort of an emergency landing on this little moon, this little religious moon called Bethlehem, the big ship sends down these flyers essentially saying, "We're hunting these two war criminals," and it describes Mal and Zoe, and that's the big cliffhanger. So I really like this because it's like, It's digging into a big part of what Firefly was, which is the fact that Mal and Zoe were in this war. A big part of the show and the story of Mal is that he did lose this, and he lost kind of everything he believed in, and it was kind of him, searching for a purpose again and meaning again, and kind of pretending that he didn't have one for a while. But deep down, he's a hero, and he ultimately does, right? That's kind of where it goes. But that's a big part of it, and obviously, we did delve into, of course, their history on the show a little bit, but we never got quite this, where they were being hunted specifically because of things they did in the war, as if they maybe went too far. And there's a couple of quick the panels here where you see these flashes of red, and there's one that looks like one of them's holding a katana, and it might have been a very violent scene. And it's very intriguing. It's like, oh god, what happened in the past? What are they hinting at here? Is there something that they're actually regretful for because of how far they went, of how vicious they maybe went in their tactics? So be curious to dig into that, and deal with that stuff. The rest of the book, when they land on the planet, it's very reminiscent of something you might have got on the show. It feels like it could have been an episode of the show where they're on this planet and they interact with some of the locals, and we kind of learn that they're very religious. And one of the interesting things that comes up with this is that Shepherd Book kind of clashes with this group, Moriah. Let me get the exact phrase. The reason why I remember Moriah is because Mal keeps getting it wrong. He keeps calling them Maria, and it's Moriah with an O, and he keeps being corrected on that. But they basically get hired. They're looking for work because they need work. And yeah, it's the Pilgrims of Moriah, and basically they hire Mal and Co to escort them because there's a lot of bandits on this moon, and Book kind of clashes because he doesn't seem to like them right away, and then when they start talking to Book, Brother Jeremiah, whatever his name is, kind of says, wait, why are you, traveling with these cretins, these unholy people, the prostitute, the violent people? And Book's like, well, why are you hiring them then? He's like, no, well, they're already lost souls. We're just giving them a chance at some mercy in the afterlife. But why are you with them? And he's kind of judging them, and it's kind of this conflicting ideologies within religion itself. There is a scene where some bandits show up, and they kind of get debating with the pilgrims, and then Mal and Zoe and Jane kind of de-escalate the situation and tell the bandits to get lost. What's interesting here is that the pilgrims then get angry. They say, wait, why didn't you kill them? And Mal's like, well, we don't have to kill them. Like, you didn't hire us to be assassins. You hired us for an escort. We'll kill if we need to. If the situation arises where they're going to shoot at us, yeah, sure, we'll put them down, but we don't need to kill them, so why would we? And he's like, oh, fine then. And he walks off in a humph. And it's kind of the point is that even they're looking for blood. There's a hypocrisy to them. It's like, oh, we'll hire some cretins who are, who we see as unholy to do our killing for us, but they were very much expecting them to kill. They were hoping they would kill the bandits and leave, no mercy behind, kind of thing. And so it feels very Firefly in that sense. And there's little cute moments here or there. There's a couple of moments where Kaylee's kind of like, making little comments about Mal being into Inara, and even Zoe says to Mal, maybe you should talk to her about what you feel. And there's some great banter between that, and Wash kind of chiming in there, Kaylee thinking something's cute, about a moment between Mal and Inara, because Mal kind of cares about Inara and tells her to stay in the ship because it might be dangerous, and then Inara kind of shows him up by having more knowledge about this moon rather than he does, and telling him to be careful. And Kaylee's just sort of smiling away, and you can see Jill's state in your head as you're watching this, like her smirking and grinning gleefully about the romance that could be, kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, if anything, yeah, like the opening being just too close to kind of the opening Serenity in terms of concept, and then maybe like at one point Wash is sitting playing with these dinosaurs, and I'm like, okay, right, it almost just feels like, oh, we have to put in a couple of the iconic little things that people remember from Firefly, and I get the need to do that to a point, but it almost feels like just a little bit too fan servicey if you do too much of it, and it was just like, okay, maybe it's just one too much right now, but nah. So like I say, the ship looks great, and I typically like the art a lot. There's just a couple of faces here or there that feel a little bit off, but I'm intrigued where we're going here. I'm intrigued to have more of Book clashing with other religious figures. I'm intrigued to have Mal and Zoe be hunted for what they did in the war, and maybe what that might reveal about something they actually did that they maybe do actually regret, that maybe is something that is classed as going too far by the others. It ends with a funny joke as well, because there's a bounty on their head for 10,000 whatever, and Jane says, well, that would pay for the ship repairs at least. Which is great. It's such a Jane line. It's gold. But yeah, so that is the first issue of Firefly. I want to keep this fairly short and sweet, and I'm about just under 15 minutes. That's okay. So yeah, so I'll be doing this theoretically every month when a new issue comes out. So it'll just be one a month. Don't worry about this being like, oh, there's going to be tons of single comic reviews, flooding the channel. There won't be. There's going to be Firefly, and then there's going to be Buffy starting in January, and that'll pretty much be it. I'm not saying there'll never be more than that, but certainly because I'm starting at the ground up here with these two, I can get these going. So hopefully you had some fun hearing about what's in the comic. Hopefully, if you have read the comic, you can talk to us about it in comments. Let me know what you thought of the book, and thoughts and opinions and that kind of thing. But yeah, that is me. So thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. Get us on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV if you want to support the channel and everything we do here. Get us on the Twitters at mail_fuzz for channel updates. You can get me on Twitter at Wooble89. But otherwise, so like, subscribe, all the usual things. Thank you very much, guys, once again. We'll see you next time. And always remember to never get lost in the Speed Force.